Honored to be here with Keith Lovegrove, who has global interest with his company Avaya, but we are here to talk with him a little bit on a philanthropic level and the Going to Bat Foundation, which your son Kieran and a couple of his teammates will introduce them to them, the young man who pitches in the Cleveland Indians organization. But kind of take me to the genesis, Keith, going back to when he was a teenager and saw some who might not be able to keep playing baseball and wanted to help.
Yeah, there were three kids who grew up playing in Orange County, California, from fairly privileged backgrounds, and they recognized that not everyone had the same opportunities. And they were exposed to environments where kids, coming from possibly single families, didn't necessarily have the needs, may have had the talent, but didn't have the means to play baseball. And so they came up with this idea of starting the Going to Bat Foundation, which is essentially to offer anyone who wants to play baseball or softball with an alternative to any other destructive activity they might get up to. And they've been very successful in that so far.
Well, they've been successful enough, obviously, in the California area where they've reached out in the inner cities and reached out in areas where there's need. You explained to me an idea that they, with your guidance, helped create in Arizona that the Diamondbacks picked up and really supported, but also in South Africa as well. You're a South African native, moved to the United States when he was about, 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah.
And so not only have you reached there with regard to philanthropy, but you also intend to give, but also help grow the game in places like South Africa.
Right, so the game is tough. The sporting talent is there in huge amounts. The opportunities aren't necessarily there. So what I wanted to provide for South Africa, or what actually Kieran wanted to provide, I'll just facilitate it, was essentially to create the kind of experiences I had with Perfect Game when my son was coming up as a prospect, where the aspirant baseball player could actually see what real talent looked like and what they would need to do to get to the next level. And when we proposed this idea and worked through some of the issues there, we got great interest from Europe and Asia, because if you think of South Africa, it's a beautiful country with a very mild climate and a perfect off-season venue for baseball for the Northern Hemisphere countries. So I looked at something that would give the kids in South Africa, the baseball kids in South Africa, something to aspire to. The idea was to bring an event, a showcase or a tournament to South Africa, and then supplement the talent, the local talent, with talent from Europe and Asia, so they could really see what they were aspiring to become. The problem is they weren't facing the level of pitching that we see on a daily basis and around us today. They needed exposure to that, and the coaches, sort of over the shoulder training for the coaches, and so that's how that idea came to fruition. So, and I naturally reached out to Perfect Game because they, to me, are the absolute leaders in the field. If you're going to host a showcase, you're going to host a tournament, then I would not do it if I couldn't partner with them. So we're going to try and work through the logistics and see if it's a viable option.
So the genesis of a great relationship is what we're talking about and sharing with all of you. And back to the foundation. Adam Salcido, I want to mention, and Kyle Candala, along with Kieran, those are the three young men that founded this foundation. That part of it, you're talking about growing the sport, but the philanthropic, that continues to grow, doesn't it?
Correct. Kyle actually put together an opportunity. There was a mission going to South Africa, coincidentally, to build sustainable playgrounds. And so he teamed with those folks, and we shipped out with them a whole bunch of baseball gear. Because if you look at the game, it lends itself to that kind of environment where that infrastructure isn't necessarily there. But baseball in its purest form, is a ball, a stick, and two gloves. And so we were able to ship out gloves and balls. Sticks they could find.
Yeah.
And so this group in California, Kyle found, and they were able to recently ship a whole bunch of gear out to these groups in South Africa to help foster the game there. And similarly, the three kids did a tour of California and went to various events, like Trotsky's baseball events, and collected gear. They put up a little kiosk and collected used baseball gear, and then have shipped it to little fishing villages in Alaska, to South Africa, to schools in Louisiana. They worked, the foundation was fortunate enough to get a scholarship from one of the manufacturers, and they were able to really spread that out amongst inner city schools in Los Angeles and Phoenix. to make sure that those kids have the opportunity to get on the field and represent and play high school baseball when those budgets are being seriously contracted. So the idea that they voiced to me was, we don't want anyone falling through the cracks. We want to make sure that everyone that wants to play baseball has the opportunity to play baseball. So that was the kernel of the idea, and that's what we sort of grew it from there.
Grassroots efforts certainly help folk. Visit it's goingtobat.org. As he was mentioning earlier, the Arizona Diamondbacks, Andre Ethier, a rival of Arizona's, has stepped up and written some big checks as well. Now let's talk a little bit about Kieran, because he came through this system. Should he make it to the big leagues, he's a third-round pick and a very talented, hard-throwing pitcher. Should he make it, though, after going through this system and signing out of Mission Viejo High School, he will be the first South African-born player to make it to the major leagues.
In fact, there's no African-born player has ever played Major League Baseball. There was one individual, Barry Armitage, who played an exhibition inning for the Kansas City Royals, but he's the only South African or African-born player. At the moment, there are 8 in the minor leagues, all vying to get there first, so it's they're competing against each other, but it's a very exciting prospect to have the opportunity to represent an entire continent and everything that goes with that, the enthusiasm for the game that will be built out of that. So whether it's Kieran or whether it's one of the other 7 guys who absolutely embrace the idea of somebody from Africa making it to the major leagues and opening what I look at as potentially the new Dominican Republic in terms of what talent is there and what desire is there. So it's a very exciting prospect.
Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, visit the website. It's a great concept, goingtobat.org. And look around. You might see a 14 or a 15-year-old that comes up with a great idea. Support them, because this is what could happen.